Blood tastes like old pennies. That was my last conscious thought before the concrete met my skull, taking the fall for a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud I absolutely did not commit. Now I am staring down at the exact same heavy stock acceptance letter that ruined my previous life. Only this time my pulse is a steady, quiet drum. My best friend is drooling over the six-figure salary printed on the page, practically begging for the opportunity. I slide the paper across the scratched laminate table. Take it, I tell her. Let her dig her own grave. Bile burn the back of my throat. I woke up gasping, my fingers clawing at the cheap cotton sheets of my bed, expecting the cold, abrasive texture of a prison uniform. Instead, my nails dug into a frayed quilt. The air in the room was heavy, smelling sharply of burnt toast and cloying vanilla perfume. My lungs seized. I was supposed to be dead. I distinctly remembered the slick asphalt, the blinding glare of the headlights, the crushing weight of the delivery truck that ended my frantic run from the federal indictments. I remembered the bleach smell of the precinct holding cell from the night before, clinging to my skin like a disease. But there were no sirens here, just the erratic, vibrating hum of my old apartment's broken refrigerator. Earth to Chloe. "Hello, are you having a stroke or just zoning out again?" I snapped my head to the right. Stella. She was leaning against my doorframe, filing her nails with an emery board. The friction made a soft, rhythmic shh sound that grated against my eardrums. She looked exactly as she had 5 years ago, perfect blowout, oversized college sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder, a smirk playing on lips painted a glossy peach. My hands started to shake. I pressed them flat against my thighs, feeling the rough denim of my jeans. The date on my phone, sitting face up on the nightstand, read October 14th, the exact day the letter arrived. "You're sweating," Stella noted, not looking up from her cuticles. "Look, I brought the mail up. You got the big envelope. Kensington Logistics." She tossed a thick cream-colored envelope onto the bed. It landed with a soft thud near my knee. The logo in the corner, a sharp minimalist K, made my stomach violently reject its contents. In my past life, I tore that envelope open with trembling, joyful hands. I cried. I hugged Stella. I thought I had finally broken out of our lower middle-class rut. I didn't know the CFO Harrison was looking for a naive, eager young accountant to sign off on a maze of shell companies. I didn't know I was being hired as a human shield. "Open it," Stella urged, dropping the nail file and stepping closer. Her perfume was suffocating now. "Come on. If it's an offer, drinks are on you tonight." I stared at the thick paper. My mouth was entirely dry, tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth. A wave of profound, exhausting cynicism washed over me. I wasn't a hero. I didn't want to burn Kensington Logistics to the ground in some grand crusade. I just wanted to survive. I wanted to never see the inside of a courtroom. I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. I slid my thumb under the flap and ripped it open, pulling out the single sheet of parchment. "We are thrilled to offer you the position of lead comptroller. Base salary of $120,000. Signing bonus." Well, Stella practically vibrated, leaning over my shoulder. Her eyes darted across the text. I felt the heat of her breath on my neck. I watched her pupils dilate as she read the numbers. A sharp, ugly spike of envy radiated from her posture. "Oh my God, 120. Chloe, that's insane. You don't even have your CPA yet." I know I said, my voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from the other side of a long tunnel. "You're going to be rich," she whispered. It wasn't a congratulation. It was a complaint. Stella had always been the prettier one, the more charismatic one. I was the drab workhorse who helped her pass statistics. Me out-earning her, this drastically fundamentally broke the rules of our friendship. In my past life, I had ignored that jealousy, blinded by my own success. I had even gotten her a job in the HR department a year later, a favor she repaid by testifying against me, crying crocodile tears on the stand, claiming she had warned me about the irregularities. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the tight set of her jaw, the way her manicured fingers twitched with the urge to snatch the paper from my hands. "I'm not taking it," I said. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the rattling fridge. What Stella blinked, stepping back. "Are you high?" The interview was weird, I lied, keeping my voice utterly flat. The CFO, Harrison. He kept asking borderline questions about my personal life, whether I had family in the city, how much debt I had. It gave me a terrible feeling. I'm declining it. "You're throwing away 6 figures because of a feeling," Stella's voice shrilled. She grabbed the letter from my hand. "Chloe, you have 30,000 in student loans. You eat ramen 4 nights a week. You can't just walk away from this." I said, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. The floorboards were freezing against my bare feet. "And I will. I'd rather be poor than work for a creep." Stella stared at the paper, then at me. I could practically see the gears grinding in her head. The ambition, the greed, the absolute certainty that she was smarter than me and could handle whatever creepy vibes I was too weak to tolerate. "You know," Stella started, her voice dropping an octave, slipping into that persuasive, sugary tone she used to get out of parking tickets. "They desperately need someone. If you really aren't going to take it," I could call the recruiter. "Tell them you had a family emergency, but that I'm highly qualified and looking. We have the exact same degree, Chloe." My chest tightened. It was terrifyingly easy. "Be my guest," I said, walking past her toward the tiny bathroom. "The recruiter's name is Davis. Number is at the bottom. Tell him whatever you want." I closed the bathroom door and locked it. I leaned over the sink, gripping the porcelain edges, until my knuckles turned stark white, staring at my pale reflection in the spotted mirror. I wasn't pushing her into traffic. I was just opening the door. She was the one choosing to walk into the slaughterhouse. Rain lashed against the greasy window of the diner, distorting the neon signs across the street into blurry streaks of red and blue. It had been exactly 3 weeks since Stella walked into the Kensington Logistics headquarters and charmingly fast-talked her way into my discarded offer. She was late. She was always late now. I sat in the vinyl booth, picking at a plate of lukewarm fries. The diner smelled heavily of old frying oil bleach and wet wool. It was a far cry from the Michelin-starred places Stella had been dropping hints about texting me from. The bell above the door jingled sharply. Stella swept in, shaking a black designer umbrella that sprayed water onto the cracked linoleum. She was wearing a trench coat that cost more than my entire month's rent, her hair sleek and impervious to the humidity. She spotted me, flashed a brilliantly white smile, and slid into the booth across from me. "God, this weather is miserable," she groaned, tossing a pristine leather tote bag onto the seat beside her. The hardware on the bag clinked a heavy, expensive sound. "Sorry I'm late. Harrison needed me to review some last-minute vendor consolidations before the quarter closed." My stomach gave a phantom lurch. Vendor consolidations. I knew exactly what those were. Phantom invoices from shell companies registered in Delaware, bleeding the company's investors dry. In my past life, Harrison had presented them to me as legacy cleanup. "It's fine," I said, taking a sip of water. The rim of the glass tasted faintly of dish soap. "You look great. The job is treating you well. Honestly, Chloe, it's a dream." Stella leaned forward, her eyes bright with a manic kind of energy. "I don't know what weird vibe you got from Harrison, but he is a genius, and he trusts me implicitly. He says I have a much better head for the big picture than most fresh grads." "Because you don't look at the details," I thought, dragging a fry through a puddle of ketchup. "Because you sign where he tells you to sign." "That's amazing, Stella." I kept my tone perfectly modulated, a supportive, slightly envious friend. I had to play the part. If she suspected I knew anything, the timeline would fracture. I needed her confident. I needed her arrogant. "Is there anything else?" Jessica asked, looking at her phone. She was already bored. She thought compliance was just putting numbers into columns and signing a PDF at the end of the month. She had no idea about the state auditors coming on the 15th. I knew David hadn't told her. He liked to pretend the audit was a routine formality, brushing it under the rug so he didn't have to deal with the stress. I stared at the card. My fingertips tingled. I remembered the sheer terror I felt when the FBI showed me the statements from that exact card account, highlighting luxury purchases and cash withdrawals I had never made, all authorized under my login credentials. "You should be careful with that," I said mildly. "Corporate expenses can be tricky if they audit." "State compliance audit," I said, standing up and grabbing my box. "Scheduled for Thursday at 9 a.m. Panic fast and sharp flashed in her blue eyes. "Thursday? That's in 3 days. David didn't say anything about an audit." "I'm sure he just forgot," I lied smoothly. I could feel the adrenaline leaving my system, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "It's all in the binders. The master sheet is on the drive. Good luck, Jessica." I didn't wait for her to respond. I hoisted the box onto my hip and walked away. The walk to the elevator felt infinitely longer than it had the first time. The box was heavy, the plastic handles digging into my palms. I passed Tom from marketing, who gave me a confused nod. I didn't nod back. I just stared straight ahead, watching the brushed steel doors of the elevator slide open. I stepped inside and pressed the lobby button. As the doors closed, cutting off the view of the gray carpet and the hunched figures of my former co-workers, I let out a long, shaky breath. My stomach churned a sudden cocktail of nausea and euphoric relief. I leaned back against the cool metal wall of the elevator car. The descent made my ears pop. When I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors of the lobby, the October air hit me like a physical blow. It was crisp smelling of damp asphalt and distant street food. Traffic hummed on the avenue, a chaotic, loud, beautiful noise. I wasn't rushing to my car to cry. I wasn't driving blindly into a rainstorm. "Quiet," Stella echoed, wrinkling her nose slightly. "Well, as long as it pays the bills right. But honestly, if you ever want to leave, let me know. I could probably get you on as a data entry clerk. Harrison owes me a favor. I saved the company like 40 grand in tax liabilities today just by routing some payments through a subsidiary." I forced a smile, though my jaw ached from the tension. She was doing it. She was doing everything Harrison needed her to do, wrapping the noose around her own neck with eager, manicured hands. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. A police cruiser drove past the diner, its siren suddenly wailing. The sharp, piercing sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. My breath hitched. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. For a split second, I wasn't in the booth. I was back on the asphalt, the heavy boots of the officers jogging toward my broken body, the flashing blue and red lights blinding me. I squeezed my eyes shut, digging my nails so hard into my palms that they threatened to draw blood. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I counted silently. Grounding. I am here. I am safe. I am not the one holding the bag. When I opened my eyes, Stella was looking at her phone, entirely oblivious to my panic. Harrison wants me at a dinner meeting tonight, she sighed, though she looked thrilled. She stood up, grabbing her expensive bag. Put the fries on my card, okay? Consider it a treat. She left the black plastic on the table and walked out into the rain. I sat there listening to the hum of the diner, looking at the card that would destroy her life, and felt absolutely nothing but relief. November brought a bitter, biting chill that seeped through the corrugated metal walls of the nursery's back office. I sat wrapped in a heavy wool cardigan, the scratchy fibers rubbing against my wrists as I manually entered fertilizer invoices into a dilapidated desktop computer. The heater beneath my desk hummed a steady rattling tune. It smelled of scorched dust and damp peat moss in here. I loved it. There was no pretense in the smell of dirt. My phone buzzed against the scuffed laminate desk, shattering the quiet. The screen lit up with Stella's name. I let it vibrate 3 times, watching the plastic casing inch toward the edge of the desk before finally hitting accept. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Chloe, thank God, you're the only person who actually answers their phone." Stella's voice was breathy, clipped. In the background, I could hear the muted roar of city traffic and the sharp honk of a cab. I've been trying to get a hold of Greg in compliance for 2 hours. It's lunchtime on a Tuesday, Stella. He's probably eating. "Well, some of us don't have time to eat," she snapped. A sharp inhale followed. She was lighting a cigarette. Stella only smoked when she was bordering on a panic attack. Harrison dumped a massive portfolio review on my desk at 8 a.m. He needs it reconciled by end of day for a board meeting tomorrow. "Sounds like a lot of trust," I murmured, clicking my mouse deliberately, staring at a line item for 40 bags of perlite. "It is. It's great. It's just..." She exhaled the smoke, hissing through her teeth. "The numbers are weird, Chloe. I'm looking at these offshore logistical account stuff in the Caymans, a holding firm in Cyprus, and the disbursement schedules don't match the freight manifests. At all. Millions of dollars are just sitting in transit according to the ledger, but the physical freight arrived weeks ago." My hand froze over the mouse. The air in my tiny office suddenly felt vacuumed out. I knew those accounts. Cyprus. The holding firm was called Apex Ventures. In my previous life, that was the exact account the prosecution projected onto a massive screen in the courtroom, highlighting my digital signature, authorizing the transfers. That was the account that bought Harrison his 3rd yacht while I was fitted for an orange jumpsuit. "Have you asked Harrison about it?" I asked. My throat was tight. Of course I did. He said it's a standard tax deferment strategy, something about capitalizing on international depreciation windows. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "It sounds brilliant when he explains it, but looking at the raw data, I don't know. It feels messy. You're the lead comptroller." I said the words tasting like ash. "If you aren't comfortable signing off, don't." "Are you joking? I can't push back on this. Do you know what my bonus is going to be if this quarter closes strong?" The anxiety in her voice was instantly swallowed by that familiar ravenous greed. Besides, Harrison personally walked me through the authorization protocols. He literally stood over my shoulder and showed me how to bypass the secondary review flag. He said I'm the only one sharp enough to handle the nuanced stuff. A phantom weight pressed down on my chest. I remembered Harrison standing over my shoulder, smelling of expensive cedar cologne, and spearmint, his heavy hand resting on the back of my chair. Just bypass the flag, Chloe. It's legacy nonsense. I trust you. If he told you to do it, I guess that's your answer, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, exactly. I just needed to vent. I'm running on 3 hours of sleep and 4 espressos. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Anyway, I have to get back. I'm putting this all through. We're still on for dinner Friday, right? My treat. I'm taking you somewhere that doesn't smell like French fries. Sure. Friday. I hung up. The screen went black. I sat in the dim light of the nursery office, listening to the rain begin to pelt the metal roof. My hands were trembling. I pressed them flat against the cold desktop, trying to ground myself. A sick, twisted knot of guilt writhed in my stomach. She had practically handed me the opportunity to warn her. I could have told her about Apex Ventures. I could have told her to run to quit, to call the SEC. But the memory of the cold concrete floor of the holding cell rushed back vivid and suffocating. The way the guards looked at me. The absolute crushing isolation of taking the fall for a man who didn't even know my last name. Stella hadn't warned me when she testified. She had saved herself. I picked up my pen and went back to the fertilizer invoices. Let her authorize it. It was her signature on the digital ledger now. Friday night tasted like metallic oysters and sour champagne. Stella had booked a corner booth at an aggressively modern seafood restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the lighting was so dim you needed a flashlight to read the menu, and the waiters spoke in hushed, reverent whispers. She looked terrible. Under the ambient glow of a tiny tabletop candle, the heavy concealer under her eyes was cracking. Her skin had a grayish, exhausted pallor. She was wearing a new silk blouse that looked incredibly expensive, but she kept picking at the cuff, her fingernails usually flawlessly manicured, bitten down to the quick. "You aren't eating," she pointed out, gesturing with a fork, holding a translucent sliver of raw yellowtail. "I'm pacing myself," I replied, taking a small sip of my water. The restaurant smelled of iodine lemon and the overpowering scent of another patron's heavy floral perfume. It was giving me a migraine. Stella practically inhaled her wine, signaling the sommelier for another pour before her glass was even empty. God, this week was brutal. I finalized the Cyprus transfers. Harrison was thrilled. He actually gave me the keys to his Porsche to run an errand yesterday. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her leg was bouncing under the table, vibrating the heavy mahogany wood. "That's generous of him," I said, watching her carefully. "He's a mentor." She insisted, her voice a little too loud for the intimate setting. A couple at the next table shot us an irritated glance. Stella didn't notice. "He's teaching me how real wealth works. It's not about following the rules, Chloe. It's about understanding which rules are actually just suggestions." I felt a cold bead of sweat slide down my ribs. That was Harrison's favorite line. He had used it on me during a performance review right before he asked me to falsify a depreciation report. Hearing it come out of Stella's mouth was surreal. It was like listening to a ghost recite its own obituary. "Stella," I started, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "Are you sure you understand the liability you're taking on if your name is on those transfers?" "My name is on the transfers because I'm the head of the department." She interrupted, her tone instantly defensive, sharp as broken glass. That's how corporate hierarchy works. I get the liability, but I also get the credit. Look at this. She reached into her purse and pulled out a heavy velvet-lined box, sliding it across the table. I opened it. Inside sat a thick, diamond-encrusted tennis bracelet. It caught the low light, throwing fractured rainbows across the tablecloth. "A closing bonus from Harrison," she said, leaning back, a smug, hollow expression settling over her tired features. "Off the books. Just to thank you for grinding it out this week." I stared at the diamonds. They looked like ice. They looked like handcuffs. In my past life, my closing bonus had been a leased BMW that the Fed seized on the second day of the investigation. "It's beautiful," I said, closing the box and pushing it back toward her. I didn't want my fingerprints anywhere near it. "Right, you don't get stuff like this working at a dirt farm." Chloe, the alcohol was loosening her tongue, bringing out the cruelty she usually kept masked under a veneer of friendly condescension. "I'm sorry I didn't mean it like that. I want you to see what you're missing. You could have had this." I did have it, I thought. And it destroyed me. "I'm happy where I am," I said, softly. Stella let out a frustrated sigh, rubbing her temples. "I know, you always were satisfied with the bare minimum. Anyway, listen, the reason I wanted to dinner..." She leaned forward, her voice dropping the arrogant mask, slipping to reveal raw, unadulterated panic. "I have this flash drive. It's raw data from the logistics side, not the sanitized stuff I put in the ledger. The actual shipping manifests." My blood turned to ice. "I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just need you to look at it," she whispered, her eyes wide, begging. "You were always better at the raw math than me. You don't have to do anything. Just look at the spreadsheets and tell me if I'm crazy. Tell me if the numbers gap is just a rounding error." She reached into her bag again. I saw the glint of a silver thumb drive. "No." The word punched out of my mouth before I could stop it. It was sharp, definitive, and loud enough to make her flinch. "Chloe, please. It'll take you an hour." I said, "No, Stella." I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "I don't work for Kensington. I am not under an NDA. If you show me proprietary financial data, you are breaching your contract. And if something is actually wrong with those numbers, I become an accessory just by looking at them." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me, the betrayal naked on her face. She had expected me to fold. She had expected the quiet, helpful Chloe, who used to do her homework, to step in and fix her mess. You're being paranoid," she stammered, pulling her hand out of her bag without the drive. "Maybe," I said, throwing a $50 bill onto the table to cover my untouched water and the appetizer. I stood up. The air in the restaurant suddenly felt entirely suffocating. "But it's your job, Stella. You wanted it. You took it. The math is yours to figure out." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, the muffled sound of jazz fading behind me. When I hit the cold night air, I took a deep, shuddering breath. The trap was locked, and I had just thrown away the only key. December arrived with a brittle, punishing cold that froze the gravel outside the nursery into jagged little peaks. Inside the main greenhouse, the air was a thick, humid soup of wet potting soil, chemical fertilizer, and the sharp, resinous bite of Fraser firs we were prepping for the holiday rush. I loved the physical labor of it. Hauling 40-pound bags of mulch left my shoulders aching and my hands calloused, a rough, tangible pain that grounded me perfectly in the present. It was honest work. The ledgers I managed for Tom, the owner, were so clean they were almost boring. No shell companies, just dirt water and margin. Tuesday afternoon, the heavy plastic flaps of the greenhouse entrance parted with a violent snap. A rush of freezing air cut through the humidity. I was kneeling in the dirt, repotting a massive monstera when I looked up. Stella was standing in the aisle. She looked entirely out of place, a ghost haunting a garden center. Her silver Audi was parked haphazardly outside the engine, still idling a plume of white exhaust curling into the gray sky. She was wearing a camel hair coat that trailed in the muddy puddles of the concrete floor. But it was her face that made my breath catch. The glossy, untouchable arrogance was completely gone. Her skin was sallow, stretched tight over her cheekbones, and her eyes were rimmed with a bruised, exhausted purple. She smelled of stale espresso dry shampoo and the sour tang of old fear. They served a subpoena, she said. No greeting. Her voice was a cracked, reedy whisper. I slowly stood up, wiping my soil-caked hands on my denim apron. The wet dirt clumped and fell to the concrete with soft, damp thuds. Who did the SEC? Stella took a step forward, her expensive leather boots sinking into a pile of spilled peat moss. She didn't even look down. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to shove them deep into her coat pockets. A formal inquiry into the fourth quarter offshore disbursements. They asked for 3 years of backdated communications regarding Apex Ventures. A phantom drop of freezing water slid down my spine. Apex Ventures, the killing blow. In my past life, that subpoena had arrived in late January. Harrison had accelerated the timeline. He was cashing out early, probably spooked by some internal metric. Where is Harrison? I asked, keeping my voice low, intensely even. Switzerland, she choked out a dry sob, escaping her throat. She looked around frantically, as if federal agents were hiding behind the weeping figs. He left on Sunday for a scheduled ski trip with investors. He took the corporate jet. Chloe, he left me as proxy. I'm the primary point of contact for the auditors. They're sitting in the main conference room right now. Men in cheap suits drinking our water, asking for my administrative passwords. My stomach churned. The memory was so vivid, I could taste the stale metallic coffee from the Kensington break room. I remembered sitting across from those exact men, offering them my login credentials, because I genuinely believed I had nothing to hide. I remembered the exact moment their polite bureaucratic smiles hardened into predatory stares. Did you give them the passwords? I asked. I had to. It's company policy to comply with federal inquiries. Stella's voice shrilled, echoing off the glass ceiling. A few of the nursery workers down the aisle glanced over. She lowered her voice, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating off her panic. But the numbers, Chloe. The raw data doesn't match the ledger I submitted. I tried to pull up the original freight manifest this morning to build a defense file, and they're gone. The server directory is wiped. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. Of course they are. Harrison had scrubbed the local drives before he got on the plane. He had tied the fraudulent wire transfers to her terminal, her login, and her digital signature. Stella. I said the rough texture of my apron scraping against my palms as I gripped the fabric. You need a lawyer, not corporate counsel. Your own lawyer. I can't afford a white-collar defense attorney. She hissed, tears finally spilling over her lower lashes, cutting tracks through her foundation. Do you know what their retainers are? $50,000 just to pick up the phone. I spent my signing bonus on the condo down payment. I maxed out my personal credit trying to keep up with the executives. I don't have liquid cash. She reached out, grabbing my forearm. Her grip was bruising, desperate. You have to help me. You know accounting theory better than anyone. If we can just reconstruct the local files, maybe we can prove it was a system glitch, a routing error. You can come to the office after hours. Stop. I pulled my arm away. The sudden violence of the motion surprised us both. Listen to yourself. Reconstruct deleted files on a server currently under federal audit. That's tampering with evidence, Stella. That is a felony. I'm going to go to prison. She screamed, the sound raw and hideous. She collapsed against one of the heavy wooden display tables, knocking over a tray of succulents. Terracotta pots shattered against the floor, spilling dry earth and bruised green leaves. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving. Harrison isn't answering his phone. His assistant says his voicemail is full. He set me up. And I walked right into it. I stood there looking down at the broken clay at my feet. The urge to comfort her, the deep ingrained reflex of a decade-long friendship, tugged at my chest. But then I remembered the cold concrete bench of the holding cell, the rough, humiliating strip search. The way she had looked at me in the courtroom, entirely composed, playing the victim on the witness stand to secure her own immunity. She was crying because she was caught, not because she was innocent. She had seen the discrepancies. She had bypassed the security flags. She took the diamond bracelet and the keys to the Porsche. You need to leave, Stella, I said quietly. She snapped her head up, her eyes red and feral. What Tom doesn't like drama in the greenhouse. And I have to finish this repotting. The betrayal on her face was absolute. It was the same look I had given her when the judge read my sentence. You're a monster, she whispered, backing away, her heels crunching over the broken terracotta. I came to you for help. I'm your best friend. You're the lead comptroller of Kensington Logistics, I corrected her, turning back to the Monstera. You handle the big picture. Now go handle it. I didn't watch her leave. I just listened to the heavy plastic flaps snap shut, followed by the frantic peeling squeal of her tires out of the gravel lot. I buried my hands deep into the cold, wet soil, letting the dirt pack under my fingernails, breathing in the scent of pine until my hands stopped shaking. February brought a brutal, blinding blizzard that effectively shut down the city. The sky outside my small apartment window was a solid wall of churning white, muffling the usual traffic sounds into an eerie, suffocating silence. The radiator hissed a comforting rhythmic sputter that contrasted sharply with the tightness in my chest. I was sitting cross-legged on my faded rug, drinking bitter black coffee from a chipped mug, watching the local news on my tiny flat-screen television. The volume was low, but the bright yellow block letters on the backs of the windbreakers were unmistakable. FBI. The camera feed was jerky shot from a news van parked across the icy street from the Kensington Logistics headquarters. Through the falling snow, agents were wheeling out tall stacks of cardboard banker's boxes on hand trucks. The heavy glass doors of the lobby, where I had once dreamed of walking with my morning latte, were propped open. A secondary graphic flashed at the bottom of the screen: multi-agency raid at downtown logistics firm. Millions missing. My phone started vibrating on the coffee table. The loud, angry buzz against the cheap wood made me flinch, spilling a few drops of hot coffee onto my jeans. I already knew who it was. I stared at the screen. Stella's name flashed in bright white text. I let it ring. It stopped. Then immediately it started vibrating again. She was relentless. My pulse hammered a chaotic rhythm in my throat. Every time the phone vibrated, I felt the phantom grip of cold steel around my wrists. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the rough texture of the rug beneath my knees, the bitter taste of the coffee on my tongue. I was here. I was not there. On the fourth consecutive call, I answered. I didn't say hello. I just pressed the cold glass to my ear. Chloe Stella gasped. The audio was terrible. There was an intense hollow echo behind her voice, layered with the sound of heavy boots hitting tile and sharp authoritative shouting. She was hiding. Chloe, pick up. Please, God, tell me you're there. I'm here, I said. My voice sounded detached, like it belonged to a stranger. They're here, she sobbed, her breath hitching wildly. They locked down the building. They took my phone. I'm calling from a burner I kept in my gym bag. I'm locked in the fourth floor executive bathroom. I know, I said, looking at the television. Another hand truck of boxes was being loaded into a dark blue van. I'm watching it on the news. They have warrants for everything. My apartment, my bank accounts. Her voice dissolved into a high-pitched, keening whine that hurt my ear. It was the sound of an animal caught in a snare. They froze my checking account this morning while I was buying coffee. The card declined. Chloe, they took the server racks. They took the physical ledgers. I saw a federal prosecutor in the lobby. Stella, you have to come out of the bathroom. My tone was clinical. I was reciting the advice I desperately wished someone had given me. Do not make them break the door down. Do not run. If you resist, they will charge you with obstruction on top of the wire fraud. Wire fraud. She choked on the words. I didn't steal anything. Harrison stole it. He's the CFO. He ordered the transfers. Is his signature on the authorizations? I asked, staring blankly at the snow lashing against my window. Silence stretched over the line, save for her hyperventilating breaths and the distant muffled sound of a man yelling to clear the hallway. Is it Stella? I pressed the cruel reality of the situation, leaving no room for her delusions. No, she whispered, the fight completely draining out of her. It's my digital token. It's my IP address. He told me to use my admin override because his was glitching. He said it was just protocol. Then it's your fraud. You have to tell them, she pleaded, her voice breaking. You have to call the tip line. Tell them I'm innocent. Tell them about the interview you had with him. Tell them he was looking for a patsy, that you got a bad vibe. You can testify to his character, Chloe. You can tell them he's a manipulator. My stomach physically revolted. The sheer blinding audacity of it. She wanted me to walk into a federal investigation and offer myself as a character witness. She wanted me to step back into the crosshairs of the SEC just to mitigate her own catastrophic greed. Character witnesses don't negate digital signatures. Stella, I said, my grip on the phone tightening until my knuckles ached. I don't work there. I have no access to their files. If I go to the feds with a bad vibe from an interview 6 months ago, they will laugh me out of the building. Or worse, they'll look into me. Please, she begged, entirely broken. I'm terrified. I'm so cold. I don't know what to do. I have no one else. You had me, I thought, and you sold me out for a promotion you didn't even earn. Over the phone line, a heavy resounding bang echoed against the wood of the bathroom door. FBI, open the door. Step away from the stall with your hands visible. Stella shrieked, a short, sharp sound of pure terror. Put the phone down, Stella, I said quietly. Not that she could hear me over her own sobbing and the shouts of the agents. It's over. Chloe, please. Crash. The sound of splintering wood tore through the tiny speaker of my phone, followed by a chaotic scuffle of noise. Someone shouted a code. There was a clattering sound, the burner phone hitting the tile floor. I didn't hang up right away. I sat in my quiet, warm apartment, listening to the heavy static, the overlapping voices of the federal agents reading Miranda rights, and the muffled, pathetic sound of my former best friend weeping as the cold steel closed around her wrists. I hit end call. I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone cold, but it tasted exactly like survival. Mud sucked at the soles of my heavy rubber boots with a wet, obscene smacking sound. Spring had finally broken the city's frozen grip, but it brought a relentless, punishing rain that turned the nursery's gravel lot into an impassable gray swamp. I spent the entirety of April elbows deep in wet peat moss and perlite propagating hundreds of delicate maidenhair ferns in the humid, stifling belly of the main greenhouse. The air in here was so thick you had to chew it. It smelled of rotting vegetation, damp concrete, and the sharp metallic tang of iron-rich fertilizer. I was hiding. I knew it. Tom, my boss, probably knew it too, though he never asked why his quiet bookkeeper was volunteering for 6 hours of manual labor every afternoon. News of the Kensington logistics collapse was inescapable. It dominated the radio in the break room, the front page of the newspaper stacked at the corner bodega, the scrolling banners on my social media feeds. Harrison had been arrested in Geneva, his assets frozen, but he was currently sitting comfortably in a luxury Swiss holding facility, fighting extradition with a small army of multi-thousand-dollar-an-hour defense attorneys. Stella was sitting in a county jail cell. She had been denied bail. The federal prosecutor had successfully argued that as the sole signatory on dozens of offshore accounts, holding millions in stolen funds, she was an extreme flight risk. The irony made me physically ill. She couldn't even afford her own lawyer, let alone a private jet to the Caymans, but the digital paper trail Harrison had meticulously built painted her as a criminal mastermind. "Rough day for a visit," a voice called out, cutting through the low hum of the massive greenhouse exhaust fans. I startled, nearly dropping a plastic tray of seedlings. I turned around, wiping a streak of muddy sweat from my forehead. A man was standing at the end of the aisle. He wasn't one of the nursery workers. He wore a cheap tan raincoat that was dripping steadily onto the concrete and a gray suit underneath that looked like it had been slept in. He smelled strongly of wet wool, stale coffee, and cheap peppermint gum. "We're closed to the public on Mondays," I said, my voice deliberately flat. I wiped my hands on my denim apron, feeling the grit of the soil against my palms. "I'm not here to buy ferns," he replied, pulling a laminated identification card from his breast pocket and holding it up. "Investigator Sullivan, Federal Defender's Office. I'm working on Stella's case. You're Chloe Adams, right?" A cold spike of adrenaline drove straight through my chest, pinning me to the floor. The greenhouse was 80 degrees, but I was suddenly shivering. In my previous life, a man looking exactly like this had shown up at my apartment to tell me I was being indicted. "Yes," I answered carefully, not moving a single inch toward him. "I am." "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Sullivan didn't wait for an answer. He walked down the narrow aisle, brushing past hanging baskets of petunias. His eyes were sharp, evaluating the dirt on my face, the cheap clothes, the utter lack of corporate polish. "It's about your employment history with Kensington Logistics." "I don't have an employment history with them," I said. "I interviewed. They offered me a job. I declined." "Right." Sullivan pulled a small, damp notepad from his pocket. He flipped it open. "You declined $120,000 a year right out of college. And your roommate, who happened to have the exact same degree, marched in and took the job 3 days later." Stella is ambitious, I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. I wasn't comfortable with the commute. The commute. Sullivan chewed on his peppermint gum, staring at me. Chloe, I'm going to be straight with you. My client is facing 20 years in federal prison. The prosecutor is burying her under a mountain of digital signatures. She's terrified, and she's talking. She told me you had a bad feeling about the CFO. She says you warned her the books might be dirty. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. She was trying to drag me down with her. She was trying to establish that I had prior knowledge, hoping to leverage me into testifying as a hostile witness against Harrison. Or worse, implicate me in a conspiracy. Stella is lying, I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the violent pounding of my heart. I never saw their books. I was a recent graduate working as a barista when I interviewed. I didn't take the job because the CFO asked me inappropriate questions about my personal life during the interview, and it made me uncomfortable. That is the entire truth. Sullivan stopped chewing his gum. He leaned closer. The smell of wet wool was suffocating. You sure about that? Because if you looked at a proprietary ledger during that interview and realized it was a fraud and you didn't report it, that makes things complicated for you. I am perfectly sure, I said, stepping forward, forcing him to take a half step back to maintain his personal space. I met his gaze and refused to blink. I took a $30,000 a year job playing in the dirt because I didn't want to work for a creep. Stella wanted the money. She forged her own path. I have nothing else to say to you. Sullivan studied my face for a long, agonizing minute. He was looking for the tell. He was looking for the twitch of a liar, the sweat of a co-conspirator. But he found nothing because I wasn't lying about my actions in this timeline. My guilt was entirely metaphysical. He finally snapped his notepad shut. If you remember anything else about Harrison's interview tactics, my card is on the front desk. Your friend is losing her mind in there, Chloe. She really thought you'd help her. He turned and walked out, his rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the wet concrete. I stood alone in the greenhouse, listening to the rain hammer against the glass roof. I reached out and gently touched the fragile green frond of a newly sprouted fern. I had survived the first test. The feds had nothing on me. I was a ghost to them. But the phantom ache in my chest, the ugly morning pain for a best friend I had deliberately fed to the wolves, ached with a brutal, relentless throb. August arrived with a suffocating, oppressive heat that turned the city asphalt into a baking griddle. The air conditioning inside the federal courthouse was aggressively cold, a stark, shivering contrast to the blazing sun outside. The wide, polished marble hallways smelled of lemon floor wax, old paper, and the sharp, acidic tang of nervous sweat. I sat in the back row of the public gallery in courtroom 3B. The heavy wooden bench dug uncomfortably into my spine. I didn't have to be here. Sullivan had never returned. The prosecution had never called. I was entirely detached from the legal proceedings, a perfectly innocent civilian. But I needed to see it. I needed the visceral physical proof that the timeline had permanently fractured, that the nightmare of my past life was finally irreversibly transferred. The heavy oak doors at the front of the courtroom swung open. My breath caught in my throat. 2 federal marshals walked in, their faces carved from stone. Between them walked Stella. My stomach plummeted. The physical degradation was shocking. The flawless, glowing woman who had strutted through our apartment in designer clothes was gone. Her glossy, blown-out hair was tied back in a harsh, messy knot, exposing an inch of dull, mousy roots. She was wearing an ill-fitting, cheap gray pantsuit undoubtedly provided by the public defender's office, that hung off her frame like a loose tarp. She had lost at least 15 pounds. Her skin possessed a translucent, sickly pallor under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. She looked small. She looked entirely broken. The defense table was a sparse affair. Just Stella and a tired-looking public defender who was shuffling blindly through a stack of manila folders. There was no high-powered legal team. There was no Harrison to save her. Harrison had cut a massive immunity deal with the SEC in Switzerland, handing over a trove of encrypted hard drives in exchange for a slap on the wrist and no jail time. He had successfully pinned the entire offshore shell game on his rogue, ambitious lead comptroller. The judge, a severe woman with reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, banged her gavel. The sound cracked through the silent room like a gunshot. I flinched my fingers instinctively, gripping the edge of the wooden bench in front of me. "We are here for the sentencing of Stella Davis," the judge announced, her voice echoing off the high wood-paneled walls. "The defendant has accepted a plea agreement, pleading guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit corporate embezzlement in exchange for the dismissal of 8 remaining federal charges." I watched Stella's shoulders slump. She didn't look up. She just stared blankly at the scarred wooden table in front of her. She had taken the plea. Going to trial with her digital signatures on every fraudulent transfer would have resulted in a 20-year maximum. Ms. Davis, the judge, continued, her tone entirely devoid of sympathy. "Your actions demonstrated a profound and calculated abuse of trust. You utilized your position to siphon millions of dollars from investors, prioritizing your own financial gain and luxury lifestyle over your fiduciary duties. The fact that your superior was involved does not absolve you of the deliberate choices you made every time you bypassed security protocols and authorized those transfers. Every word was a ghost. I had stood at that exact table. I had listened to a different judge say those exact words to me. The memory was so violently real, I could feel the rough fabric of my own past life prison uniform scraping against my skin. I dug my fingernails into my thighs, grounding myself in the present, forcing myself to look at Stella. "It is the judgment of this court," the judge's voice lowered, carrying the heavy weight of finality, "that you be committed to the custody of the Bureau of Prisons, to be imprisoned for a term of 72 months. 6 years. A choked, guttural sob ripped out of Stella's throat. She collapsed forward, her face burying into her hands, her thin shoulders shaking violently. The public defender awkwardly patted her back, a hollow gesture of comfort. The marshals stepped closer, their hands resting near their utility belts, ready to secure the prisoner. "Court is adjourned," the judge said, striking the gavel one last time. The gallery began to murmur, the reporters in the front row scrambling to file their copy. I remained entirely still, frozen to the wood. The marshals gently but firmly pulled Stella to her feet. They produced a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic click of the ratchets locking around her wrists echoed in the cavernous room. It was the loudest sound in the world. As they turned her toward the side door, the exit that led directly to the holding cells and the transport vans, Stella lifted her head. Her tear-streaked hollow eyes scanned the gallery. She stopped. Through the sea of moving bodies, her gaze locked directly onto mine. The air in the courtroom seemed to evaporate. All the background noise, the shuffling shoes, the murmuring lawyers, the heavy doors faded into an absolute ringing silence. She stared at me. Her expression shifted from terrified despair to something infinitely darker. The gears in her mind slowed by months of terror, and jail food finally clicked into place. She remembered the envelope on my bed. She remembered my absolute uncharacteristic refusal to look at her flash drive. She remembered my cold, dead eyes in the nursery greenhouse. She realized I had known. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The betrayal, the pure, unadulterated horror on her face was a physical blow. She didn't just see a friend who had abandoned her. She saw the architect of her destruction. She saw the trap I had left completely open, knowing her greed would force her to step inside. A marshal tugged her arm, breaking the spell. Stella stumbled forward, disappearing behind the heavy oak door. It clicked shut behind her. I slowly stood up. My legs felt like lead, but my lungs were expanding fully for the first time in months. I walked down the center aisle, pushing open the double doors of the courtroom, and stepped out into the blazing, unforgiving heat of the August afternoon. I took a deep breath of the city air, smelling exhaust, melting tar, and the absolute perfect scent of freedom. Frost coated the greenhouse windows, turning the glass into opaque, glittering sheets of ice. I stood at the stainless steel potting bench, dragging a sharpening stone down the curved blade of my pruning shears. Shwet, shwet. The rhythmic friction vibrated up my elbow, a grounding mechanical repetition. My breath plumed in the frigid morning air. It smelled of sulfur-wet gravel and decaying pine needles. My hands were rough now. The cuticles were permanently stained a yellowish brown from the acidic soil, and a fresh blister wept clear fluid at the base of my thumb. I liked looking at them. They were the hands of a woman who actually existed in the physical world, not a corporate phantom signing off on invisible money. Tom, wearing a heavy flannel jacket that smelled like diesel exhaust, walked into the aisle and dropped a small stack of mail onto the corner of my bench. He didn't say a word, just offered a brief nod before heading toward the boiler room to check the pilot lights. I set the shears down. The metal clattered loudly against the table. Most of the mail was standard nursery business: seed catalogs, a water bill, a heavily taped box of replacement irrigation valves. But sitting squarely in the middle of the pile was a plain white envelope. The paper was incredibly thin, almost translucent, completely devoid of a return address. But it didn't need one. Stamped across the top left corner in bleeding aggressive red ink were the words Federal Bureau of Prisons. Inmate correspondence. Inspected. My stomach executed a slow, sickening roll. I wiped my hands on my denim apron, but my palms were suddenly slick with cold sweat. I stared at the red ink. It looked like a warning label on a bottle of poison. I picked it up. It weighed practically nothing. I slid my dirty thumbnail under the glued flap, tearing it open with a jagged, uneven rip. Inside was a single sheet of lined yellow legal paper. The handwriting was a chaotic, jagged scrawl. It didn't look like Stella's elegant looping cursive. It looked like the frantic scratching of an animal trying to claw its way out of a trap. The blue ballpoint ink was smeared in several places, leaving dark, greasy smudges across the cheap paper. Chloe, they allow us 1 hour of recreation in a concrete yard that smells like raw sewage. I spend the entire 60 minutes walking in a circle looking at razor wire, thinking about the last time I saw you. I think about the diner. I think about the way you looked at my corporate card. You knew. I see it so clearly now, it makes me want to rip my own hair out. You didn't decline the job because of a bad feeling. You knew exactly what Harrison was doing. You knew it was a setup. And you sat across from me eating cold French fries and watched me put the noose around my own neck. You let me brag. You let me think I was winning. Why I was your best friend. We shared clothes. I held your hair back when you drank too much on your 21st birthday. I got you through statistics. And you let me walk into a burning building without saying a single word. The food here tastes like cardboard and bleach. The lights never fully turn off. I am losing my mind. I hate him for what he did to me. But God, Chloe, I hate you so much more. He used me for money. You used me as a human shield. I hope it eats you alive. Stella, I stopped reading. The yellow paper trembled violently in my hands, producing a dry, rattling sound in the quiet greenhouse. I closed my eyes, pressing my knuckles against my forehead. The headache hit instantly, a sharp stabbing pressure behind my eyes. My chest physically ached. A massive, suffocating wave of guilt crashed over me, pulling me under. She was right. Every single word of it was true. We had been sisters. We had survived poverty together, splitting cheap grocery store pizzas and dreaming of penthouse apartments. I had deliberately stepped aside and allowed the system to completely devour her. But then the memory rushed in. It always did. The cold, abrasive texture of my own prison uniform. The humiliating, degrading strip searches. The smell of the holding cell toilet, the absolute crushing isolation of sitting in a courtroom while the entire world painted me as a greedy, manipulative thief. And I remembered Stella on the witness stand, wearing a pristine white blouse, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, swearing under oath that she had told me to stop transferring the funds. I opened my eyes. The guilt was still there. A heavy, ugly stone sitting in the bottom of my stomach. It would probably be there forever, but it was entirely eclipsed by the brutal, unyielding instinct to survive. If I had warned her, she wouldn't have listened. She would have called me jealous. She would have taken the job anyway, convinced she could outsmart Harrison, outsmart the feds, outsmart the math itself. She had chosen the Porsche. She had chosen the diamonds. She had chosen to bypass the security flags because she believed she was untouchable. I was not a hero. I was not a good person. I was a monster who had learned how to dodge the trap. I folded the yellow paper in half, then in quarters, pressing the creases down hard with my dirty thumb. I grabbed my shears and walked out the back doors of the greenhouse, stepping into the biting November wind. The gravel crunched loudly beneath my boots. Behind the compost bins sat a rusted 50-gallon steel drum we used for burning diseased roots and invasive weeds. A small fire was already smoldering inside thick, white smoke curling up into the gray sky. It smelled sharply of charred wood and ash. I tossed the folded letter into the barrel. The thin paper caught instantly. A bright orange tongue of flame curled around the edges, eating through the smeared blue ink. I stood there shivering in my canvas jacket, watching the words turn black crack and dissolve into nothing. The wind caught the fragile gray ash, lifting it up and scattering it over the frozen dirt. I turned my back to the fire and walked inside to wash my hands. Some survival costs a piece of your soul, and Chloe paid the price in full. She isn't a flawless hero. She's a traumatized woman who chose herself over a friend she knew would eventually betray her. Did Chloe cross the line from victim to villain? Or did Stella get exactly what she paid for with her own greed? The corporate trap closed, and only one of them walked away. If this dark, gritty revenge story kept you hooked, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Drop a comment below. Would you have burned the letter or kept it? See you in the next story.